welcome back to the Lies of P. My God, we need to... All right, guys, we're going to have to talk about some nuance. This is always tricky on the internet. This is always very, very tricky on the internet because it's either black or white. You love it or hate it. There's no middle ground. There's nothing like that. But we need to talk about some things because I don't know. Lies of P is a very, very good game. It is. But it has problems. And these problems are becoming more apparent. You know the best way of me describing... I want to say... I'm about to mention a game. Alright? I'm about to mention a game to you. Now, I want to say, before I go further, I really, really like the game I'm about to mention. I like it a lot, actually. I'm actually a bigger supporter of this game than most people. I do not, in any way, dislike this game. However, the game has major flaws. Very major flaws that are very apparent, that made a lot of people very, very angry. And when I say the name of the game, people are going to go, oh, yeah, ugh. And I don't feel that way. It's a fine game. It's a fine game. It's just not as good as it should have been. We're in that zone, right? You with me? You with me, guys? All right. Lies of P is a Souls-like. By definition, self-tagged by the developers. That's what it is. I think it might be more accurate to say it's a Dark Souls 2-like. I think that might be more accurate. Let's talk about this a little bit. I've been having a lot of fun with Lies of P, but as I pointed out in the first 8 hours, which we did in our first video, we're now another 8 hours in, so like 16 hours in, is that there was noticeably things that weren't perfect. But they were fine, right? It's not a problem. It's got a lot of elements I really, really like and I really enjoy, but it does have some misses. Now, as I've got further into the game, it feels as though the people who made Lies of P were having a lot of fun. They're clearly talented, but they also kind of either took the wrong things away or from their inspiration, the Souls world, or they tried to do what they do but missed the mark. Now, this is why I call it a Dark Souls 2-like. If you're not a nerd about the Souls world, you'll know that Dark Souls 2 didn't have Miyazaki at the helm, who is the Lord and Savior, the Jesus Christ, the Yoshi P of the Soulsborne universe, right? He's the guy. And infamously, he was not a part of the Dark Souls 2 game. And a lot of people noticed because they were like, oh, I would like to recommend to you, maybe Bex can find this for you, a video by Methuzahla. Methuzahla was, I don't think he even makes content much anymore, a YouTuber who did these very, very massively in-depth videos that were very well curated and thoughtful. Very eloquent for an Irish person. Crazy. Very eloquent. And he did his Dark Souls 2 video. I have never really agreed with a person more in my entire life than that video when talking about a game. Often when I see a proper game review, even the mega ones like Josh makes or something, I'll agree on some things and disagree on others. I'm like, I didn't take that away from it. That video about Dark Souls 2, I just could not get away from. Like, oh, I totally agree. Their emphasis on, like, it's hard, lol, because that's what people took away from Dark Souls 1, is, like, it became this... Dark Souls 1 still remains, at least to me, far more than something like Elden Ring, as the game that is historically significant in gaming as being super, super hard, and you were almost, like, becoming a true gamer by beating it, which is nonsense. It's absolute nonsense, and it's pure ego-driven. But that's the legacy it left behind. And when the guys went to make Dark Souls 2, they took the wrong messages away from it. The difficulty wasn't the point. It was about getting the satisfaction of overcoming a difficult challenge within the context of it making sense as to why those challenges existed. They weren't just difficult for difficult's sake, which is very easy to do. I've actually had this problem recently when talking about my disappointment in the Gallywix mythic encounter in World of Warcraft, is a lot of people took away saltiness regarding the teams, which was never my point, and I never brought that up. It was more the case of, this is too easy, and then I got countered by a lot of people who were like, oh, you just want it to be 500 pulls to be 500 pulls. Like, well, no, that's nonsense as well. Like, this whole thing seems to be lost on so many people. But I'm going to try anyway, because I think it's important. And that is becoming very apparent as we get deeper into the game. Is that they're just kind of like trying? I think so. They're either trolling. Legitimately. It's one of those. You're either trolling or you didn't understand why certain things happened in the Souls games. For example, the leap out of nowhere. Guy behind a doorway, baiting enemies that are stood in a very weird and obvious place because something horrible is going to happen to you if you attack that, but they're putting this like golden nugget on a silver platter for you to go and grab because they're going to make something horrible to happen. The amount of times that has happened now in Lies of P must be in the dozens. Like, they do that all the time to the point where it's lost all effect. Because you just know when you see an enemy who's like, oh, he's facing away from you, there's clearly some setup, and you look around and you just see random enemies dangling from fingertips all over the place. Like, you'll just see them stood around. Now, they have done that in the Soul series, but they tend to do it a bit more sparingly and a bit more considerate, and also try and make it make sense with the type of enemies they are. In Lies of P, they just do it every other room, essentially. And you now get to the point where when you go into a new room in Lies of P, you instinctively just check every corridor because it's very likely there's something just waiting to get you. And it's not because these are creepy, crawly enemies. I think about one of the early rooms in Dark Souls 3 with the little scythe guys. Those enemies are little scurrying creatures that hide in the dark. They make sense. These aren't like that. They're like mad. 1 minute they're mad, imbecilic, crazed, roaming the streets, screaming their ass off, and then in the next room they're like hiding and creeping. These enemies don't make any sense. They're either humans who have been diseased and lost their mind, or they're not, right? Like, there's no in between seemingly happening. But more importantly, level layout, level design, and mob layout. The level design I actually think is okay. I should say it's very linear. They're trying to recapture the idea of getting shortcuts and levels looping around, but not really getting it. Essentially, it's just a big box where there's a shortcut that leads you to a later part of the box. That's what they've done. They haven't come up with anything clever, which they also didn't do in Dark Souls 2. Somebody will remember some ridiculous bonfire layouts, like in Huntsman's Copse. It's ridiculous. You knock down a tree to open a shortcut to the first bonfire, and then they put a bonfire on the other side of the tree you just knocked down. It's like, it makes no sense. There was no like careful consideration of like, well, the player doesn't need this now. We don't need to have that. Instead, they'll get a satisfying shortcut. Like, oh, thank God. In this one, it's just like, oh, okay, there's a big box with something in between, and when they overcome that, we'll put a ladder down so that they can skip that part of the map. And you're like, oh, okay. It's trying to do it, but not quite getting there, right? I hope that makes sense to you. It's close, but it's not quite right. At one point, I just thought to myself, and maybe Bex can find the clip, I was like, this is just getting silly now. And we're crawling through the rafters of City Hall, I believe it is. And there's just an enormous enemy with 2 shields whose feet are too wide for what he stood on, just on a beam in the sky, surrounded by automatons that are fixed in place that throw bombs at you. Alright, so now we're up here. There's a ladder to drop down. This is kind of getting silly. Like, it's not clever in any way. It's just annoying shit on... Why? With 2 throwers as well. There's no logic there. It's just to be mean, to lol, we're going to knock you off. And people go, well, they had similar things in Anor Londo, right? Yeah, and it was dumb then too. It was dumb then too, even though they were trying to make it make sense. It was dumb then too, and Anor Londo in Souls 1 was notoriously unfinished. It's just bare bones, it's crap, and that's what they did there. I'm not saying Souls is immune to these things, which is where the nuance comes in. So they did it in Souls. Yeah, I know, and they've worked hard to get away from that stuff. But this is prevalent here. And the word that came to my mind as this carried on, so this sort of level design and mob layout has started to carry on more and more. And all I thought to myself was like, I really hope this is like a bit of a joke, a bit of a silly thing that they're doing here. Ha ha ha. And then this is going to ease off. And it does not ease off, unfortunately. It does not ease off. In fact, they double down on it more and more and more. And going through the swamp area, which is where we got to, going through the swamp area, it was big more and more apparent. It's like, oh, we've now got the giant turret on a hill that's shooting cannons at you, and we'll also throw these giant slow enemies in you inside a swamp full of corruption. Ha ha ha. And then you go to a sort of wooden Blightownish-like area next to the swamp, where there's just constantly dangling enemies just holding on by their fingertips on every single bridge and ledge with something to bait you, along with explosive barrels and things like that. I'm like, oh, God. And the word that came to mind, and again, remember, I still very much like this game, very, very much, but it's noticeable, and I think we should talk about it, is childish. I was really thinking about it for a while. So the word that kept coming to my head is childish, because it started to remind me, and maybe many of you won't resonate with this, but it's accurate, was the very first weeks of Mario Maker coming out, where people were like, you know what would be really funny if we stacked like 50 Bowsers on top of each other? And you're like, yeah, that would be funny. And then you do it, and you're like, oh, it's not funny at all, actually. It's really boring. It's actually really stupid. And there's a reason that Nintendo never made levels like this, because it's just not that... It's not that good. But you had a lot of people who got Mario Maker who were like, oh, look at this. I'll make a giant Mega Bowser, and then another one, another one, another one. And then you got to jump through lava to get there. And you're like, oh, okay. That's what it reminded me of a little bit. I was like, it just feels like the message got lost in what was happening. I think Elden Ring, Bloodborne, Souls 3, where they advanced beyond this, actually did a much better job. Sekiro certainly just did a much, much better job of this kind of stuff. So it's become noticeable, and yeah, it's a little downer on the game. Because if it carries on like this, it's like, okay, I get it, and like Souls 2, I love Souls 2, I had a great time with it, but it will be a black mark against the game, is that it's either for trolling purposes, or it's just that they didn't quite get the messaging, which is very possible because Souls 2 exists, and they didn't get the message either. It was the purpose of what was going on. Let's talk about the good stuff, though. The bosses we did. Had some great fights. I guess the two main ones here were the Swamp Monster and Champion Victor and Romeo, is what I did. Those were the primary bosses, along with a bunch of mini-bosses. Shout-outs to Tubby Clown Guy. What a awful enemy this guy is, but he's really funny. He's a big, robust, jolly Santa Claus looking clown dude who just throws big ball and chains at you over and over again and just keeps belly bouncing you all over the place. And also a Pinocchio guy, but yeah, shout out to those mini bosses. I can't remember who came first. I think it was Romeo in the Opera House. He started off with a big monster, the Puppet Lord. Yeah, he's like the Puppet King. That's him. And then turns into Romeo, which is very much seemingly based on Raiden from Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. Also in MGS 2. I think it was 2. What a cool boss. But I had a disappointing kill as well. There's a lesson to be learned here, and I'm hoping... One thing we're going to be doing is the DLC, and I'm really interested to see what they learned from the first one to transfer into the DLC and what corrections they made. One thing that's noticeable about a lot of the big major story bosses is they have far too vast a moveset. That might seem really awkward to you, but hear me out on this. If your bosses have so many different attacks they can do, that creates two problems. One, it's much more awkward for the player to learn, adapt, and overcome, which is a really satisfying part of playing these bosses, is you're like, okay, now I figured that thing out, This is why a lot of Expedition 33 bosses are actually very good, because they only have like 4 moves. Besides Renoir, who has like 7, most of them have like 3 or 4 different moves, patterns. They're difficult, but you can learn how to cope with them, because you're like, okay, it's this one, it's this one, this one. What I've had happen now multiple times in Lies of P, and that was all of these bosses today, is they have such a vast array of attacks. Some of them seemingly have upwards of 13 if you include the phase changes and things. So some bosses will have like 100 to 50% is a certain amount of attacks, then 50 to 0 will be all those attacks plus, and then they will have another phase where there's a whole new set of attacks, so essentially a different boss. And so you end up with like 14 or 15, maybe even more abilities, is when they're choosing what to do, you can get vastly different difficulties of encounter. That's problematic, because I was doing the Puppet King, I learned P1, was great with P1, was really comfortable with P1, and managed to figure out, like, okay, I can burst down his like second half of phase 1 and then kind of not deal with that and then go into learning the next boss, because the Raiden guy, Romeo, is a totally different boss encounter. So you have to progress through P1 to then do the second. It's a totally separate boss. It's the second boss. And while learning that, he has a number of crazy attacks. Some of them super fast. He could drill through the floor like 3 times. He does drop kicks. He does all kinds of stuff. I then came back for like my 3rd attempt, I think. Maybe even 4th, so not many. And he just kind of did the easy one over and over again, and I just killed him. I killed the boss. I have killed Romeo. Have I killed Romeo? A version of him, like version C, D, E, or F of Romeo? Kill's a kill, I'll take that, but I didn't get to learn or adapt or overcome any real challenge. You see the problem? Because he just didn't do the things that I was working on. He didn't do things I was struggling with in any way. He just didn't do them. He just did a couple of things and stood around, and I just battered him into the floor and he died. I was like, oh, okay. Well, I guess that's done then. So moving on from there. Champion Victor was a different beast, though. This was obviously played into me as being a professional wrestler type character. Very fun, big slammy, well telegraphed attacks. Actually, one of the better bosses I've done so far in the game. Everything he was doing made sense. He had a couple of weird baits where he'd like swing an arm and actually kick you and things like that. But really like this. This went down very quickly as well. I think like 4 pulls. And then I got to... There is another boss I should talk about here, which was the Black Rabbit Society, a council fight. I don't think council fights have really ever been good in these kinds of games, especially this one requires a lot of lock-on. Way more lock-on than I'm used to playing in Souls-likes. I typically play without lock-on at all. This one really benefits from lock-on. It was fine. The ads were very annoying, but little health. It took me quite a few goes. This was the most amount of pulls I needed on a boss that day. It was actually the Black Rabbit Society. Managing DPS. I think you can just burst him down and ignore the ads, but I did it properly. I killed all the ads and then worked on him. Nice telegraphed attacks on the guy. The little ads was super frustrating. They had relentless attacks. I think there's another conversation to be had here about your enemies playing by the same rules you are. I always found that quite prevalent in the Souls games, is very few enemies seemingly just had infinite stamina. Like they had, if they were going to do a massive, massive streak of attacks at you, then they would need some recovery to rebuild that. It almost felt like they had a similar sort of layout and spec as you did, which most of them do. Liza P does not conform to that at all. So many enemies will have 9 to 12 string attacks that just never, ever stop. And you're just like, okay, can I play now? That happens. But I'm used to that kind of stuff as well, so it's not a big deal. It's just a rule of this game. But I had fun with that fight and felt very good about it. That was my most satisfying kill. The swamp monster. This is where things gets interesting, and it actually relates back to what we talked about at the beginning of this video, is... At this point, I was like, okay, I was talking about the level design, and we got into a big discussion, actually quite nice, considering the Souls-like community can be a little agitative at times, about the different games and the nuances and things like that. There was a big discussion happening as we got to the Swamp Monster. And then people started going, here we go. Here we go. This is it. I was like, okay, so we probably got a very hard boss here. We do. We do have a hard boss here. This boss is very nasty, especially because it focuses heavily on the... I'm forgetting the name of it now. Begins with D. I don't know. It's not Despair Attack. Something like that. Decay. Decay Attack. The Decay Attack, which actually just melts your weapon, so you have to repair it if you get hit by it. But very noticeable how bad the hitboxes were. Only on a couple of attacks. Everything else made sense, but those couple of attacks are very devastating. In particular, again, I don't know if Bex can find a great clip of this, but the breath, the decay breath it does, where the animation of what it's doing is very, very far away from what's actually hitting you. Like, regularly, you'll just get stopped and take damage, although you're clearly not stood in the spray. And you're moving to the side like you should do in that scenario. And I was like, that's a bit weird. And then the shockwaves the boss does are very, very jank. Very jank. Like, noticeably, he'll jump way over you and past you. So, like, you can't be hit by him. And then you'll die. This led to a really interesting discussion of, like, some people really like this boss and some people don't. I said, this has got some bad design. However, here's the thing. Right? There's nuance in this video that I think people might be mad about. There are some objectively just bad levels and things made in games, and then you'll find people who really like them. And here's the thing. If you learn the jank and overcome it, those people start to like it because while everybody else is struggling, you're like, but I know how to deal with it and I can kill this boss or do this level flawlessly every single time because you've learned to cope with the jank. Does that make sense? I'm sure some of you have done that. Is like you've done a level or you've done a map and it's like, it's at the start you're like, God, this thing is terrible. But then you start to learn its creaks and its crones like some broken old house. And then you sort of kind of like it. You adapt to it. You're like, yeah, I know that creak means that this is happening. I know how it shouldn't happen in the first place, but you get it. And this boss is the epitome of that for me. Because afterwards, when I killed it, I did feel good that I killed it because it was a tough boss. And then some people were like, see, you like this boss now. I was like, no, you don't understand. I'm happy I killed it, but I had to learn how to cope with the things that aren't correct. Which is a thing you've done, but it shouldn't have been that way in the first place. It shouldn't have been that way in the first place because challenge that comes from dealing with things that don't work right aren't challenge for the correct reasons. Does that make sense? I hope so. I hope some people understand this. But either way, the swamp monster died, and that is where we're up to right now. But I have all these theories, and I cannot wait to get to the DLC to see what did they respond to, what did people like, what did they change to, because it's something we've seen in a ton of other games, is that kind of situation happening. And seeing that adaptation. Guild Wars would be a prime example where Guild Wars 2 had some issues in earlier expansions, and then later on they corrected them and fixed them and got on the right track. And it can take that sort of feeling out and getting in there, because in this video that we're talking about now, I've spoken to you for a while now, but I haven't even talked about the addition of the tree, the cubes, there's all these other systems that have come in, and at some point I was like, I don't even know what's happening anymore. But I'm finding this game from an analytical point of view really, really interesting, while still having a ton of fun. As I said in the beginning, I love Dark Souls 2. It's got its obvious problems. This game also has its obvious problems. And I want to see where that goes. That's what I'm curious like a cat at this point about this game. So I'll catch you tomorrow and see what we see. Bye, guys.